In 1982, legendary director Ridley Scott released his novel adaptation Blade Runner to theaters. Despite having megastar Harrison Ford in the lead, the film flopped at the box office and was generally considered a failure. But time would prove the film far ahead of its own, and Blade Runner would not only become a beloved cult classic, but the birth of the entire visual genre of cyberpunk. Over 30 years later, the rights to the Blade Runner sequel somehow landed back in Ridley Scott's lap. Unable to do the film because of other commitments, he handed the project to modern film master Denis Villeneuve. Denis not only produced a worthy sequel, but one of the best pieces of science fiction of the 21st century that even eclipses its predecessor, perfecting what the first Blade Runner started, with Blade Runner 2049. The original Blade Runner was actually an adaptation of Philip K. Dick's novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Dick's novels were part of a growing trend of 60s writers trying to conceive of a future world with complex technology and some of the moral conundrums that may accompany that change. Blade Runner was the first time that the visual medium really delved into the depths of a dystopian cyberpunk future. It made culture-shifting decisions about what such a future may look, feel, and sound like. The dark, brutal architecture contrasted against colorful neon lights, the thick rainfall and smog, and the near-constant hum of a mechanized world. It also posed a big moral question about where the line between human and machine is drawn, and furthermore asks us to ponder what makes us human besides our DNA. Ridley called the film the most personal of his career. A sequel to Blade Runner would not only have to capture what made the original film so iconic, but separate itself so as not to live in the shadow of its predecessor. Such a task would require not only a talented director, but one with a powerful artistic vision and internal sense for world building. Enter Denis Villeneuve. There are a few interesting parallels between Ridley Scott and Villeneuve. When Scott directed Blade Runner, he had already established himself as a talented director with 1977's The Duelists, and then with cultural science fiction phenomenon Alien in 1979. When he decided to direct Blade Runner in 1980, it was after working for a year on pre-production of a version of Dune that would later be taken on and completed by David Lynch. Villeneuve was also an established director when he took on the Blade Runner sequel, and had just recently finished his first real sci-fi epic in Arrival, after a stellar career of great films. He would later go on, after finishing Blade Runner 2049, to make the best version of Dune ever put to screen. I have a video on his version of Dune where I talk more about his career and filmmaking quirks, so go and check that out. Long story short, there couldn't have been a more natural choice to bring the sequel to life. The premise of both Blade Runner films is very similar. In this dystopian future, powerful corporations have created replicants, artificial humans that are made to be stronger, faster, and more durable, who essentially serve as a slave labor force. Sometimes those replicants go rogue, and when this happens, officers called Blade Runners are sent to hunt them down and kill or retire them. Our story in each film follows a Blade Runner as they are on the hunt. In the first film, this Blade Runner is Harrison Ford's Rick Deckard. Over the course of his journey, he learns more about the replicants he hunts and finds out that they have wants, desires, and hopes as he does. They can even love. The very end of the film hints that Deckard may also be a replicant as well. The question at the heart of the film that you have to consider is, at what point are these apparently sentient machines just human beings? What criteria do we use to evaluate what a human being is? And after all, aren't we just biological machines? It's a complex question, one that will really reframe how you see the treatment of droids in Star Wars, by the way. 2049 really asks the same question, but in a more poignant way. The film is a true sequel, picking up 30 years after the events of the first film and following the Blade Runner K. Played by Ryan Gosling, K stands for Officer KD6-3.7, because unlike Deckard, from the beginning of the film, we know K is a replicant. He is despised not only by his human counterparts, but other replicants because of his work as a Blade Runner. The only thing that treats him with genuine care is his partner Joy. Both films use romance to explore their themes. In the original Blade Runner, it's pretty shallow. Deckard meets an attractive replicant named Rachel and falls in love with her, and decides that maybe replicants are more than just machines. But Joy is not only not human, she isn't even a replicant. She's just a holographic AI with no physical form at all. Replicants are relatively easy to empathize with, as they appear to be indiscernible from the humans around them. What makes Joy interesting is how distinctly unhuman she is when we meet her. This makes her a much better vehicle for exploring the themes of the movie. Where Rachel was barely a character in the first film, Joy is not only full of life and character, she has distinct agency in a way that even Kay doesn't for a lot of the movie. And the plot of the film always seems to come back to turn off of her. There are 4 scenes that really illustrate this: the rooftop scene, the naming scene, the intimacy scene, and finally, the billboard scene. Right after we first meet Joy, Kay takes her up to the roof of his apartment building and gives her her first experience of rain. It's a beautiful scene. Joy is kind, thoughtful, and loving towards Kay when moments before everything around him seemed to treat him with hostility. Then, just as they are embracing, she is paused by a call coming in from his boss, almost like an app on a phone. It's a wake-up call and a sobering one. Joy, it seems, is barely more than a program. Yet, later in the film, when Kay finds reason to believe he may be more than just a replicant, it's Joy who comes to give him the thing he needs most, an identity. She decides to give him the name Joe, which gives him the courage to believe he may have more purpose than to just be a slave. Their relationship comes to a head when Joy hires a replicant escort to allow her to have some kind of physical intimacy with Joe, finally becoming the most real she has ever been. Yet, all 3 of the people involved are artificial between the 2 replicants and Joy. But to Joe, it's as real as his relationship has ever been, and I think it is here that he fully accepts it. I also can't go past this scene without noting how interesting and cool the effects are here. Unfortunately, not long after this, Joy is killed and Joe finds out that he is just a replicant after all. It's at his lowest point when he encounters a large sexualized ad for Joy, a computer program sold not only to him but many others. I think the moment that hurts for both the viewer and Joe the most is when the ad says,
"You look like a good Joe."
Not a unique identity, but one of many. But does it matter? The power of this conclusion is that it doesn't evoke answers, but the very questions that Blade Runner is all about. The relationship that Joy and Joe had was real. His feelings for her were real. In her last moments, she took what seconds she had left to tell him she loved him. So perhaps then consciousness and love have little to do with the actual physical mechanisms of a body, mental or otherwise, but everything to do with experiencing the act of loving and being loved. Perhaps humanity is not found in the synapses of a biological brain, but in our relationships with one another. Even if we are one of many, we all deserve to be treated with kindness and dignity. We all should experience love. It's this very gift that Joe gives to an old Blade Runner at great sacrifice at the end of the film. It was by focus on developing its characters that 2049 was able to not only build on the themes of the original, but broaden them in a way that is unique only to the sequel. The movie even takes some time to build out Rachel and Deckard, strengthening the first film a bit as well. But Blade Runner's success was always only loosely because of the story. It was the film's combination of artistic vision of the future, its music and atmosphere that makes it so iconic. Its impact on our culture can't be understated. It founded that neon lights against dark, hard lines look that we all associate with technology to this day. Take a look at any popular tech today, especially in the gaming world, and you'll begin to see it. You have Blade Runner to thank. Visually, Blade Runner 2049 had to give a modern take on one of the most iconic worlds ever put to film. The creative team of 2049 was well equipped for the task. almost the first thing that you will notice watching the film is how stunningly beautiful it is. It feels like every frame on screen is this perfect painting in motion, with such powerful use of camera work, lighting, color, and set pieces as to be almost overwhelming. This is due in large part to the work of the incredible Roger Deakins and Dennis Gassner, both going on to be nominated for an Oscar for their work on the film, and Deakins winning the award for cinematography. Their work is based on the world that Ridley created, but it expands it immensely. While Blade Runner created Cyberpunk, the look and feel of 2049 encapsulates all that Cyberpunk has become. Villeneuve also has a great sense for scale and is eternally committed to creating giant sets and practical effects that add to a realistic feel. Legendary composer Hans Zimmer brought in a soundtrack that brings in a powerful digital atmosphere. However, what struck me the most when watching the film is how it handled tension and action. The film knows not only when to be loud, but when to be quiet and still. Much of the film is like this, these beautiful wide shots with slow and steady movement, and yet it's nearly silent. The effect is this eerie feeling of something always waiting to happen. When action does kick off, it's always built around these explosions of sound that pierce the silence, giving every gunshot or kick or punch immense weight. Production designer Dennis Gassner designed his shots musically, saying in an interview with Vice that he brings the audience along narratively through rhythms. Scenes such as the fight between Deckard and Joe in the Vegas Hollow Theater show how music, color, and light act as literal story beats during their conflict. It's brilliant atmospheric design like this that takes the principles established in the original Blade Runner and expands them to their true potential. Ridley Scott's Blade Runner will always be a classic film that introduced us to the world of cyberpunk. Its themes are becoming more resonant every day as AI increasingly become part of our lives. But Blade Runner 2049 took the groundwork that Blade Runner laid and built on top of it in every dimension. By exploring characters more deeply, specifically through Joy and Joe, we got a more interesting and expansive set of questions about the nature of humanity. Visually, the film surpasses the original due to a uniquely perfect team of creatives between Villeneuve, Deakins, and Gassner. The film gave us the quintessential representation of all that cyberpunk has become today, and Blade Runner 2049 will be seen as another fence post in science fiction, perfecting everything we loved about Blade Runner. Thanks for watching. Hey, thanks for watching my video on Blade Runner 2049. Up until I saw Dune in 2021, it was my favorite science fiction movie of the decade. The world is just so big and interesting and fun to get lost in. If you liked the video, please leave me a like or a comment. I always try to reply to any comments that I get. I'm already starting work on the next video that'll be coming out soon, so if you want to see it when it comes out, subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you haven't seen Blade Runner, hop in your spinner and take a ride through the film. I promise it won't be one that you forget. We'll see you next time.